IOP, I'm presenting a key passage analysis on a temporary matter from the collection Interpreter of Maladies by Jumble-Leary. In a minute, the passage will be read aloud, but first I want to introduce the passage and its importance. The main point of this presentation is to show that the passage includes the climax of the story because the difficulty of the character's conflict with communication is literally and figuratively illuminated. In order to understand the climax, this conflict of the struggle to speak the truth must be explained. Shobha and Shukumar have a constant struggle throughout the story to share their secrets they have kept from their marriage. To establish the conflict, the motif of truth and the struggle to share it appears throughout the story. In this passage, the conflict is seen in the climax when the two are sharing their biggest secrets and as a result pushes the theme of the role of secrets in relationships and the effect of concealing and revealing things on the dynamic of a relationship. By examining the struggle for both characters to share their most important secret with the other, the climax is intensified and reached when the two finally reveal their secrets. The passage examined is the most key passage in the story because it contains the climax, alludes to the resolution, and there is an illumination of Shobha and Shukumar's difficulty with communication both literally and figuratively. They had survived a difficult time. They finished off the shrimp. They finished off the first bottle of wine and moved on to the second. They sat together until the candle had nearly burned away. She shifted in her chair, and Shukumar thought that she was about to say something. But instead, she blew out the candle, stood up, and turned on the light switch, and sat down again.
Shouldn't we keep the lights off?
Shukumar asked. She set her plate aside and clasped her hands on the table.
I want you to see my face when I tell you this,
she said gently. His heart began to pound. The day she told him she was pregnant, she had used the very same words, saying them in the same gentle way, turning off the basketball game he'd been watching on television. He hadn't been prepared then. Now he was. Only he didn't want her to be pregnant again. He didn't want to have to pretend to be happy.
I've been looking for an apartment and I found one,
she said, narrowing her eyes on something, it seemed, behind his left shoulder. It was nobody's fault, she continued. They'd been through enough. She needed some time alone. She had money saved up for a security deposit. The apartment was on Beacon Hill, so she could walk to work. She had signed the lease that night before coming home. She wouldn't look at him, but he stared at her. It was obvious that she'd rehearsed the lines. All this time she'd been looking for an apartment, testing the water pressure, asking a realtor if heat and hot water were included in the rent. It sickened Shukumar, knowing that she had spent these past evenings preparing for a life without him. He was relieved, and yet he was sickened. This was what she'd been trying to tell him for the past 4 evenings. This was the point of her game. Now it was his turn to speak. There was something he'd swore he'd never tell her, and for 6 months he had done his best to block it from his mind. Before the ultrasound, she had asked the doctor not to tell her the sex of their child, and Shukumar had agreed. She had wanted it to be a surprise. Later, those few times they talked about what had happened, she said at least they'd been spared that knowledge. In a way, she almost took pride in her decision, for it enabled her to seek refuge in a mystery. He knew that she assumed it was a mystery for him, too. He'd arrived too late from Baltimore, when it was all over and she was lying on the hospital bed. But he hadn't. He'd arrived early enough to see their baby, and to hold him before they cremated him. At first, he had recoiled at the suggestion, but the doctor said holding the baby might help him with the process of grieving. Shobha was asleep. The baby had been cleaned off, his bulbous lids shut tight to the world.
Our baby was a boy,
he said.
His skin was more red than brown. He had black hair on his head. He weighed almost 5 pounds. His fingers were curled shut, just like yours in the night.
Shobha looked at him now, her face contorted with sorrow. He had cheated on a college exam, ripped a picture of a woman out of a magazine. He had returned a sweater and got drunk in the middle of the day instead. These were the things he had told her. He had held his son, who had known life only within her, against his chest in a darkened room in an unknown wing of the hospital. He held him against him until a nurse knocked and took him away. And he promised himself that day that he would never tell Shobha, because he still loved her then, and it was the one thing in her life that she had wanted to be a surprise. Shukumar stood up and stacked his plate on top of hers. He carried the plates to the sink, but instead of running the tap, he looked out the window. Outside, the evening was still warm, and the Bradfords were walking arm in arm. As he watched the room went dark, and he spun around. Shobha had turned the lights off. She came back to the table and sat down, and after a moment, Shukumar joined her. They wept together for the things they now knew. So the key passage analysis will look at the passage in terms of literary techniques that connect to other parts of the story to create the passage as the climax and source of resolution in the story. The literary techniques I am focusing on are visual imagery, details, sentence structure, symbolism, irony, and the plot element of climax. The learning goals for the presentation are to understand why the passage is important to the plot of the story, to gain an understanding of how the literary techniques work together to create the overall meaning, and to make a connection between the characters' conflict and the resolution of the conflict. Okay, so the visual imagery in the passage work to create tension between the two characters, and this is the evidence that focuses on the sections that describe the two characters' eye contact and their descriptions of certain scenarios. The description of eye contact exemplifies the struggle to tell the truth for Shobha and the determination to discover it from Shukumar. Shobha can barely make eye contact with Shukumar and is constantly looking behind him or past his head, which shows her internal conflict and struggle with the truth. She cannot keep eye contact with him, which distinguishes her inability to be completely honest with him without a struggle. Shobha wants to tell him that she is leaving, but cannot face him. Shukumar, however, consistently makes eye contact and comments on Shobha's lack of eye contact in the text, which shows his deep determination to understand what his wife is trying to tell him and his interest in her thoughts. The imagery of the eye contact creates tensions between the two characters because it shows their different motives and foreshadows that she does not have good news for him. The imagery of the eye contact also establishes the eye contact as a motif that represents their struggle for the truth and adds to tension in the passage. And then later, Shukumar describes their newborn when he first holds them, and Shobha doesn't know that he has held them. So Shukumar's description of the newborn shows his anger and upset feelings towards Shobha's revealing because he has sworn before never to tell her. However, he is so upset that she no longer loves him, he tells her not only the deep dark secret, but also the details of the secret. Shukumar's description of the newborn shows the shift in their relationship from seemingly happy and loving to betrayal, tension, and confliction. And then at the end, when they talk about Shukumar looking out the window and watching the other couple, the final description of the scenery after they share their secrets shows the shift in focus from the tension in their relationship and the secrets to contemplating and realization of what they've just told each other. And then the next section focuses on details of Shukumar's thoughts on her being pregnant and then his description of the baby. So the details in this passage focuses on Shukumar's description of the newborn and his thoughts that Shobha is pregnant again. The details that relate to the discussion of new life contrast the end of their relationship and add even more tension to the climax when Shobha tells him she is leaving, and his thoughts of another being in their family is pushed away rapidly, and the end of their relationship floods his thoughts. Lahiri includes Shukumar's discussion of the pregnancy and being ready for another announcement like this to build the tension directly up to the climax when Shobha tells him that she is going to leave him. She includes this because it builds the tension, irony, and characterization of Shukumar's thoughts. The details of the dead newborn's appearance are included to show Shukumar's emotions towards Shobha immediately after Shobha springs her news on him, so that the contrast between his love and his anger or sadness is seen as a result of him sharing the one secret he would never tell her when he loved her. The next section is focusing on sentence structure and how it changes when Shobha immediately tells Shukumar that she is leaving him. So the sentence structure is shorter and less complex when Shobha originally tells Shukumar about her decision to leave him to create the feeling of taking the secret in. The short sentences also create a feeling of separation that is seen between the two characters at the point when she tells him she is leaving. The shorter sentence structure also adds to the irony because throughout the stories the characters seem to be getting closer, but when Shobha tells her secret and the shorter sentences establish separation, the characters are finally split apart. The shorter sentences are also prevalent when the two characters communicate less, and it is more a time of shock and realization for Shukumar. The next one is symbolism. It focuses on the candles, which were part of the interactive portion, and then the darkness, what that also represents. So the candles and the lights represent truth, and the candles and lights are lit whenever the two share their secrets during dinner earlier in the story, and therefore the light directly represents the truth, because when the candles are lit is the only time when the two take time out of their day to share truths with each other. The light also represents truth because in this passage, Shobha turns on the entire room light when she is sharing her biggest secret with Shukumar, and more truth is being revealed, which is why more light is needed. Darkness is also a symbol for silence and secrecy. At the end of the story, Shobha turns the lights back off, and the two cry together. The darkness symbolizes the false truth the two have been living in, and the silence that they had maintained with each other. It contrasts the symbol of light and is used to highlight the importance of truth in the story. The next part is irony, and the irony in this story focuses on the irony that he thinks that that Shukumar thinks the two characters are getting closer, but in reality, Shoba's leaving him. So Lahiri includes ironic elements to intensify the climax and build tension between the characters. The main source of irony in the story is that Shukumar continually thinks that he and his wife are becoming closer and falling back in love with each other, when in reality, the wife is waiting for the right moment to tell him she is leaving. The irony is built throughout the story, but is especially important in this scene because it builds tensions until the climax and still continues to afterwards. The irony of Shukumar saying he does not want to pretend to be happy for another pregnancy makes the climax of Shoba's truth even more dramatic and builds tension between the characters even more. And then I looked at the plot elements of the climax in the passage, and the climax is when there's three main parts of the climax. When Shoba tells him she is leaving, when he realizes the point of her game overall, and he says that he realizes that, and then the third part is when he says that he saw the baby. So the climax of the story is when the two characters tell their deepest secrets and finally accept that their life as they know it is over. The climax happens in this scene and not only adds to the characterization, irony, symbolism, and style in the passage, but is vital to the story because it's the main source of tension throughout the story. At the end of the scene, the conflict of secrecy is resolved. The climax and resolution in this passage makes it a key passage because the climax and resolution of the conflict are important to understanding the character's struggle with truth and secrecy and communication throughout the story. So what do all of these mean? Lahiri includes all these literary techniques so that they can work together to create a central meaning. The different aspects of this passage work together to create the feeling of tension and separation between the characters in a temporary matter, which creates the theme of the story. The theme is focused on the importance of secrets in a relationship and how what is concealed or revealed can affect the dynamic of the relationship. The theme is shown throughout the passage when the two characters discuss their secrets with a significant person, and as a result, the dynamic of the relationship shifts from loving and caring to somber and reserved. So in conclusion, Lahiri includes the elements of the plot and literary devices to create essential meaning by establishing the meaning in the passage. The passage becomes key to the development and resolution of the